The bitter mountain wind howled through the pine trees like the voice of death itself, carrying with it the promise of a brutal winter night that would test the limits of human endurance. 13-year-old Benjamin Parker pressed himself against the rough bark of a massive pine tree, his thin body trembling uncontrollably as snowflakes began to fall like frozen tears from the black sky above. His breath came in short, panicked gasps that created small clouds of vapor in the frigid air, and his bare feet had long since gone numb from the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. The boy had been running for 3 hours now, since the moment he had overheard Mayor Richardson and Sheriff Collins discussing his fate in hushed tones outside the orphanage dormitory. Their words had cut through his heart like a blade made of ice. "The boy's becoming too much trouble," the mayor had said in his cold, calculating voice. "He's been asking too many questions about his parents' death, stirring up the other children. With talk of injustice and corruption, we can't afford to have him digging into matters that are better left buried." Benjamin had learned to survive by listening carefully to adult conversations, by staying in the shadows and gathering information that might help him understand the world that had become so cruel and unpredictable after his parents' mysterious death 6 months earlier. His father had been the town's honest sheriff before Collins took over, and his mother had been a schoolteacher beloved by everyone who knew her. Their sudden deaths in what was officially called a house fire had left Benjamin with more questions than answers, especially when he noticed how quickly certain people had moved to benefit from his family's tragedy. "Take him out to Deadman's Ridge tonight," Sheriff Collins had continued, his voice carrying the kind of casual cruelty that made Benjamin's blood run cold. "Make it look like he wandered off in the snow and got lost. The wolves up there are hungry this time of year, and they don't leave much evidence behind. By spring, there won't be anything left to find." The casual way they discussed his murder had filled Benjamin with a terror so profound that it took all his willpower to remain hidden and continue listening. These were supposed to be the men who protected orphaned children, who ensured their safety and well-being. Instead, they were planning his death as if it were just another piece of unpleasant business to be handled efficiently and quietly. The complete dismissal of his worth as a human being had sparked something fierce and desperate in Benjamin's young heart. If these men thought he would go quietly to his death, they were about to learn how wrong they could be. As soon as the opportunity presented itself, he had slipped out of the orphanage through a window he had carefully loosened weeks earlier, disappearing into the night like a ghost seeking refuge from those who should have protected him. Now, hours later and miles from town, Benjamin was beginning to understand that his escape might have only delayed his death rather than prevented it. The mountain wilderness in winter was almost as dangerous as the corrupt officials he had fled, and his thin clothing and lack of supplies made survival seem increasingly unlikely with each passing minute. The sound that froze his blood and made his heart hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird was the long, haunting howl of a wolf somewhere in the darkness ahead of him. The sound was answered by another howl from his left, then another from his right, creating a symphony of predatory hunger that surrounded him completely. Benjamin had heard the stories that travelers told around campfires, tales of wolf packs that could track a scent for miles and bring down prey much larger and stronger than a 13-year-old boy. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he began to see shapes moving between the trees, grey shadows that seemed to flow like liquid smoke through the forest. The wolves were keeping their distance for now, but he could see their eyes reflecting what little moonlight penetrated the thick canopy above, yellow points of light that seemed to burn with ancient intelligence and patient hunger. Benjamin, Mind raced as he tried to remember everything he had ever heard about surviving encounters with wolves. Don't run, that was the most important rule, because running would trigger their hunting instinct and turn him from a potential threat into definite prey. Don't make direct eye contact because wolves interpreted that as a challenge. Make yourself appear as large as possible. Make noise to show you weren't afraid, even if terror was consuming you from the inside out. But as more wolves emerged from the shadows, Benjamin realized that all the survival advice in the world might not be enough to save him. The pack was large, at least 8 animals that he could count, and they moved with the coordinated intelligence of predators who had worked together to bring down countless victims. Their leader was a massive male with silver-grey fur and scars across his muzzle that spoke of many battles fought and won. The wolves seemed unimpressed by his attempt at communication, continuing their slow advance with the patience of creatures who knew that time was on their side. The boy had nowhere to run that they couldn't follow, no weapons to defend himself with, and no allies to call upon for help. He was alone in their territory, weak and vulnerable, exactly the kind of prey they specialized in hunting. As the pack closed in, Benjamin pressed his back against the tree trunk and tried to make himself as tall as possible, spreading his thin arms wide and making himself appear larger than he actually was. His voice cracked as he attempted to shout at the approaching predators, but the sound that emerged was more like the squeak of a frightened mouse than the roar of a dangerous opponent. The largest wolf paused about 10 feet away. It's intelligent. I was studying the boy with the kind of calculation that spoke of a mind weighing options and making decisions. Behind their leader, the rest of the pack had formed a loose semicircle, cutting off any possible escape routes while maintaining positions that would allow them to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Benjamin closed his eyes and thought about his parents, wondering if he would see them again soon in whatever existence might come after death. He thought about the injustices that had led to this moment, the corruption that had destroyed his family and was now about to claim his life as well. Most of all, he thought about how unfair it was that a 13-year-old boy should face such a lonely and terrifying end. But as he waited for the inevitable attack, something unexpected happened. Through the howling of the wind and the thundering of his own heartbeat, he heard a sound that seemed impossible in this remote wilderness, the creak of a wooden door opening somewhere in the darkness ahead. "Hello," called a voice, deep and gravelly, but carrying a note of genuine concern. "Is someone out there?" I heard shouting. The voice belonged to a human being, the first potentially friendly human Benjamin had encountered since his escape began. But the wolves were still surrounding him, still poised to attack, and he didn't know if help would arrive in time to make any difference. "Help!" Benjamin called out, his voice cracking with desperation and hope. "Please help me! I'm surrounded by wolves." The response was immediate, the sound of heavy boots running through snow, accompanied by what sounded like the lever action of a rifle being worked to chamber a round. The wolves heard it too, and their confident advance faltered as they recognized the distinctive sound of human weapons being prepared for use. Through the darkness, Benjamin could see a light approaching, the warm glow of a lantern cutting through the night like a beacon of salvation. Behind the light, he could make out the shape of a large man carrying what appeared to be a rifle, moving with the kind of confidence that suggested he was no stranger to dangerous encounters with wild animals. The man who had emerged from the darkness to save Benjamin from the wolf pack was Isaiah Weatherby, a mountain man who had been living alone in these remote peaks for the better part of 20 years. His weathered face, lined by wind and sun, and marked by a lifetime of hard decisions, showed genuine concern as he took in the boy's desperate condition. Isaiah was tall and broad-shouldered, built like the mountains themselves, with hands that had learned to be gentle despite their obvious strength and eyes that had seen enough of the world's cruelty to recognize it instantly in others. "I had to run," Benjamin said through chattering teeth, his voice barely above a whisper, as exhaustion and cold finally began to overwhelm his young body. "They were going to kill me. Mayor Richardson and Sheriff Collins. They planned to leave me for the wolves because I know too much about what really happened to my parents." Isaiah's expression darkened at the mention of corruption and planned murder, his jaw tightening in a way that suggested he was no stranger to the kind of evil that masqueraded as civilization in frontier towns. He'd seen enough of human nature during his years in the wilderness to know that sometimes the most dangerous predators walked on 2 legs instead of 4. "Easy, son," Isaiah said, wrapping his thick winter coat around Benjamin's trembling shoulders. The coat was massive on the boy's thin frame, but it carried the blessed warmth of human body heat and the comforting smell of wood smoke and honest work. "You're safe now. Those wolves won't come back tonight, and anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first." As they walked toward Isaiah's cabin, Benjamin felt strength returning to his legs with each step that took him closer to shelter and safety. The cabin itself appeared through the swirling snow like something out of a fairy tale, its windows glowing with warm yellow light and smoke rising peacefully from its stone chimney. It was a modest structure built from logs that Isaiah had cut and shaped himself, but it radiated the kind of solid comfort that came from being constructed with skill and maintained with care. "Built this place with my own 2 hands," Isaiah said with quiet pride as he pushed open the heavy wooden door. "Took me the better part of 2 years to get it just right, but it's weathered every storm the mountains could throw at it. Should keep us plenty warm while we figure out what to do about your situation." The interior of the cabin was everything Benjamin had hoped it would be and more. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, filled with logs that crackled and popped as they released their warmth into the single large room. Handmade furniture crafted from local wood created a sense of rustic comfort, while shelves lined the walls holding books, tools, and the various necessities of wilderness life. Pelts and furs provided both decoration and additional insulation, while the smell of recently cooked food made Benjamin's empty stomach growl with desperate hunger. "Sit yourself down by the fire," Isaiah instructed, pulling up a chair close to the hearth where the flames could work on driving the cold from Benjamin's bones. "I'll get some hot food in you, and then we can talk about what brought you to my doorstep with a pack of wolves on your tail." The stew was the most delicious thing Benjamin had ever tasted, rich with meat and vegetables, and seasoned with herbs that Isaiah grew in his own garden during the warmer months. Each spoonful seemed to spread warmth through his entire body, and he could feel his strength returning with every bite. "Now then," Isaiah said, settling into his own chair with a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven itself. "Tell me about these men who want you dead, and why they think killing a 13-year-old boy is necessary for their plans." Benjamin took a deep breath and began to tell his story, starting with his parents' mysterious death and continuing through the increasingly obvious corruption he had witnessed in the months since. He spoke of Mayor Richardson's sudden wealth following his father's death, of Sheriff Collins's suspicious behavior around the time of the house fire, and of the conversations he had overheard that suggested his parents had discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. "My father was investigating something before he died," Benjamin said, his young voice carrying a maturity that came from being forced to grow up too quickly. "He kept a journal hidden in our house, and I managed to find it before they moved me to the orphanage. It talks about missing money from the town treasury, about bribes being paid to look the other way when certain laws were broken." Isaiah listened intently, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail of corruption and murder that Benjamin revealed. The mountain man had left civilization behind, partly to escape exactly this kind of evil. but he couldn't stand by and watch a child be destroyed by the very people who were supposed to protect him. "Where's this journal now?" Isaiah asked, his voice carrying the kind of careful control that suggested he was fighting to contain his anger at what he was hearing. "Hidden back at the orphanage," Benjamin replied. "I was afraid to take it with me when I ran because I thought they might search me if they caught me, but I memorized most of what my father wrote, all the names and dates and amounts of money that were stolen. The information Benjamin possessed was clearly valuable enough to kill for, which explained why Richardson and Collins were willing to go to such extreme lengths to silence him permanently. But it also represented potential salvation, if it could be used properly to expose their crimes and bring them to justice. "Son," Isaiah said carefully, "you realize that what you know makes you the most dangerous person in the territory to these corrupt officials. They're not going to stop hunting you just because you got away from them tonight." Isaiah rose from his chair and walked to a wooden chest in the corner of the room, from which he retrieved a well-oiled rifle and began checking its action with the practiced efficiency of someone who had relied on weapons for survival for decades. "Well," he said grimly, "if they want to come after you, they'll have to deal with me first, and I've been dealing with predators of all kinds for longer than you've been alive." "Why are you helping me?" Benjamin asked suddenly, the question that had been bothering him since his rescue finally finding voice. "You don't even know me. Why would you risk your life to protect a stranger?" Isaiah paused in his weapon maintenance and looked directly at the boy, his eyes showing a depth of pain that suggested his own history contained tragedies that had shaped his character. "Because 20 years ago, I failed to protect someone who needed my help," he said quietly. "I was younger then, more concerned with my own problems than with doing what was right. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late, and an innocent person died because of my selfishness. I won't let that happen again," Isaiah continued, his voice carrying the kind of determination that could move mountains. "Whatever it takes, however long we have to fight, you're going to live to see justice done for your parents' murder." Outside the cabin, the wind continued to howl through the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, wolves called to each other in the ancient language of the hunt. But inside Isaiah's warm, secure home, Benjamin felt something he hadn't experienced since his parents' death: hope for the future, and the certainty that he wasn't alone in his fight for truth and justice. Subscribe to our channel now to see how this incredible story of survival and justice continues to unfold. Don't miss what happens next in this powerful tale. The dawn that broke over Isaiah's mountain cabin brought with it not just the promise of a new day, but the arrival of unexpected visitors whose presence would transform Benjamin's fight for survival into something much larger and more dangerous. The sound of horses approaching through the snow had awakened both the mountain man and the boy, and Isaiah's experienced ear could tell from the rhythm of the hoofbeats that this was not a casual visit from friendly neighbors. "Stay low and keep quiet," Isaiah instructed Benjamin, his voice carrying the kind of urgent authority that came from recognizing immediate danger. The mountain man moved to his window with practiced stealth, peering through the gap in the heavy curtains to assess the threat that was approaching his sanctuary. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Sheriff Collins was leading a group of 6 armed men up the narrow trail toward the cabin, their faces grim with the kind of determination that suggested they had come prepared for violence. Behind Collins rode Mayor Richardson, his soft features twisted with the desperate fury of a man whose carefully constructed criminal empire was being threatened by a 13-year-old boy who knew too much. "They found us," Benjamin whispered, his voice tight with the terror of a hunted animal who thought he had found safety only to discover that his predators were still on his trail. "How did they track us so quickly?" Isaiah's jaw tightened as he studied the approaching riders, his mind already calculating angles of fire and defensive positions that might give them a fighting chance against superior numbers. "Probably had trackers working all night," he said, grimly. "Men like that don't give up when their survival is at stake." The mountain man moved quickly but quietly around his cabin, gathering weapons and ammunition while checking the various defensive preparations he had made over the years of living alone in dangerous territory. His home had been built with the possibility of attack in mind, with heavy shutters that could stop bullets, and shooting ports that would allow him to fire back at attackers while remaining protected. "Listen to me carefully," Isaiah said, kneeling beside Benjamin and speaking in the kind of steady, calm voice that helped people think clearly in desperate situations. "I'm going to try to negotiate with them first, see if we can resolve this, without bloodshed. But if shooting starts, you crawl under that table there and stay down no matter what happens." "They won't negotiate," Benjamin said, with the kind of certainty that came from understanding the true nature of the men who were hunting him. "They can't afford to let me live, and they know that killing me is the only way to keep their crimes hidden." The sound of horses stopping outside the cabin was followed by the jingle of spurs and the low murmur of men discussing their strategy for the confrontation ahead. Isaiah could hear Sheriff Collins giving orders to his men, positioning them around the cabin to prevent any possibility of escape. "Weatherby," Collins called out, his voice carrying the false authority of corrupt law enforcement. "We know you're in there, and we know you've got the boy with you. Send him out and nobody has to get hurt." Isaiah opened the cabin door just wide enough to show himself, while keeping most of his body protected behind the heavy wooden frame. "Sheriff," he said calmly, his rifle held ready but not directly threatening, "that's quite a posse you've brought. Up here must be some serious crime you're investigating." "The boy's a dangerous fugitive," Mayor Richardson called out, his voice shrill with barely controlled panic. "He's armed and violent, and he's threatened to kill innocent citizens. We're here to bring him to justice." The lies were so blatant that Isaiah had to suppress a bitter laugh. "Funny thing about that," he said, his voice carrying the kind of dry humor that came from decades of dealing with human foolishness. "The boy I found last night was scared, cold, and running for his life from wolves. Didn't seem particularly armed or dangerous to me." "You're interfering with official law enforcement," Collins snapped, his patience clearly running thin as he realized that intimidation wasn't going to work on the mountain man. "Stand aside, or we'll arrest you as an accomplice to his crimes." "What crimes would those be, exactly?" Isaiah asked, his tone remaining conversational despite the tension of the situation. "Taking food when he was hungry, seeking shelter when he was cold, or maybe the real crime is knowing too much about certain people's illegal activities." The accusation hit its mark, and Isaiah could see Collins and Richardson exchanging nervous glances as they realized their quarry had shared information that could destroy them both. The pretense of legal authority was beginning to crumble in the face of someone who obviously knew the truth about their motivations. "Last chance, Weatherby," Collins said, his hand moving to rest on his gun handle. "Send out the boy, or we'll come in and get him. Either way, he's leaving with us today." Isaiah's response was to step back inside the cabin and close the door firmly, the sound echoing across the mountain clearing like a challenge to battle. Through the window, he could see the posse members taking positions behind trees and rocks, preparing for what they clearly expected to be a violent confrontation. The first shot came without warning, a rifle bullet that splintered the wooden shutter next to Isaiah's head and announced that the time for talking had ended. The mountain man's response was immediate and devastating, his return fire dropping. One of the attackers before the man could find better cover. "Stay down!" Isaiah shouted to Benjamin as more bullets began to impact the cabin walls, sending splinters flying and filling the air with the acrid smell of gunpowder and splintered wood. What followed was a running battle that lasted nearly an hour, with Isaiah using his knowledge of the terrain and his carefully prepared defenses to hold off attackers who outnumbered him 6-1. The mountain man's superior marksmanship and intimate knowledge of every angle and approach to his cabin allowed him to make every shot count while avoiding the increasingly desperate return fire from Collins and his men. It was at this critical moment that salvation arrived from an unexpected source. The sound of many horses approaching at high speed caused both sides to pause in their shooting, uncertain about who the new arrivals might be and whose side they would take in the confrontation. Through the gunsmoke and confusion, Isaiah saw a sight that filled him with hope, a detachment of federal marshals led by a man he recognized as Marshal Thomas Garrett, one of the most respected lawmen in the territory. Someone had finally taken Benjamin's accusations seriously enough to investigate, and they had arrived just in time to prevent a massacre. "Federal marshals!" Garrett called out, his voice carrying the absolute authority of legitimate law enforcement. "Everyone drop your weapons and step away from cover." The effect on Collins and his men was immediate and telling. Instead of identifying themselves as law enforcement officers engaged in legitimate duties, they began to scatter like the criminals they actually were, abandoning their attack on the cabin in favor of escape. "Don't let them get away!" Isaiah shouted, emerging from his cabin with Benjamin close behind. "These are the men who murdered the boy's parents and tried to silence him permanently." What followed was a brief but decisive chase through the mountain forest with federal marshals, rounding up Collins, Richardson, and their accomplices before they could escape to spread their corruption elsewhere. The evidence that Benjamin possessed, combined with Isaiah's testimony about the attempted murder, would be more than enough to ensure that justice was finally served. As the dust settled and the corrupt officials were led away in chains, Marshal Garrett approached Isaiah and Benjamin with genuine respect in his eyes. "Son," he said to the boy, "your courage in preserving your father's evidence and surviving long enough to tell the truth has probably saved this entire territory from years of corruption and criminal activity." Benjamin looked up at Isaiah, the man who had risked everything to protect a stranger's child, and felt tears of gratitude flowing down his cheeks. "What happens to me now?" he asked quietly. Isaiah knelt down to the boy's level, his weathered face showing the kind of gentle strength that had saved Benjamin's life in more ways than one. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "I could use some help around the cabin, someone to teach the ways of mountain living, someone to share meals with and stories by the fire. Think you might be interested in staying up here with an old mountain man?" The offer of a real home with someone who genuinely cared about his welfare was more than Benjamin had dared to hope for. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice strong with newfound confidence. "I'd like that very much." As the federal marshals departed with their prisoners and the mountain cabin returned to its peaceful solitude, Benjamin realized that his terrifying night with the wolves had led him not just to safety, but to something even more precious. A real family with someone who would protect him, teach him, and help him grow into the kind of man his parents would have been proud of. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow more amazing stories of courage, survival, and found family. From the Old West, hit that subscribe button now and join our community.